Welcome and good morning to you, our viewers watching from Saint Lucia and Saint Lucians watching from abroad. This is the Saint Lucia COVID-19 response report for today, Tuesday, the 19th of May, 2020. My name is Jessie Leonce and I'm joined in studio, as usual, by my colleague Carlton Cyril. We continue with providing you with updates. St. Lucia is now, the reopening of our society is now underway. We're making our way between phase 3 and phase 4 in the next coming weeks at this time. Good morning, Carlton.
Morning, Jesse. Bonjour, Saint Lucia. Encore nous dit bienvenue. Headquarters COVID-19. Ici, nous avons toute information. Là, nous pouvons faire 20 minutes. Aujourd'hui, c'est mardi, le 19 mai. Et quand la coutume, n'importe développement qui prend cours, nous avons n'importe ça qui est nécessaire, important pour vous savez, nous avons discussion, information, c'est ici à Okaheni. Pour ces gens qui l'autre pays, toujours un plaisir pour nous et puis nous. Et pour ces gens qui écoutent nous sur radio, nous avons dit bonjour de manière qui spéciale avec ces gens qui sont sur internet. Quand la coutume mais qu'on savent messieurs dames, information parmi bagay nous discuter elle est venue pour nous quitter troisième phase là quand en quatrième là et puis l'autre développement nous ba aujourd'hui à sur un bon matin un mardi bon matin nous avons dit bienvenue tout bonnement ici à headquarters Vermin COVID-19.
Thanks for that, Carlton. And just to let you know that we are working on increased incremental operations here in St. Lucia and moving forward our recovery phase from COVID-19. This morning, we will be hearing shortly from the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmont-George, giving us some critical information. I think most important is that all businesses are permitted to operate as we proceed from increased incremental operations and moving forward. On Saturday, we did get word from the authorities that these businesses would have to first apply with their relevant ministries. However, we're getting word now that these businesses can all go ahead and open once they comply with the physical distancing, infection prevention, and occupational health and safety measures under this COVID-19 watch. So I will first go to Dr. Sharon Belmont-George, the clip from Dr. Sharon Belmont-George speaking to us on the latest testing as well as the provisions made as we enter into increased incremental operations and our general recovery from COVID-19.
On Monday, May 18th, 2020, results for 41 samples were received and they were all negative. These samples were due to increased community testing. This brings a total of 827 tests conducted to date. Although we have maintained a low transmission level of COVID-19 in country, we remind the public that we are still at risk and must maintain and remain vigilant as the threat remains. As we continue with the phased reopening, we must ensure that all protocols are adhered to. The Ministry of Commerce has advised that businesses are permitted to recommence full operations from Monday, May 18, 2020. Although approval for opening is not required at this time, business places are required to review the relevant protocols to ensure they comply with physical distancing, infection prevention and control, occupational health and safety measures. The protocols documents can be accessed via the websites www.covid19response.lc or govt.lc and the Facebook pages of the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Bureau of Health Education. We encourage the population to continue adopting the recommended infection prevention and control measures and physical distancing measures when going out into the public. We would like to see these measures also adopted at the community level as well.
That was Dr. Sharon Belmont-George, the Chief Medical Officer for St. Lucia, just giving us an update on the tests that have been conducted to date. On Monday, 18th May, 41 samples were received and they were all negative. These samples are due to increased community testing. And this brings the total number of tests conducted to date in St. Lucia to 827. And we're getting word from the CMO that although we have maintained a low transmission of COVID-19 in the country, we are reminded that we are still at risk. The threat of COVID-19 still exists, and we must continue to ensure that all protocols are adhered to as we reopen on a phased basis. The Ministry of Commerce has advised that businesses are permitted to recommence full operations as of Monday, May 18th, 2020. We did get word over the weekend that the businesses that wish to reopen, that are desirous of opening as soon as possible, they can make their submission, their application to the relevant ministries that they're registered to. However, at this time, we're hearing from the authorities that the businesses can all open once they ensure that they are adhering to the relevant protocols to ensure they comply with physical distancing, infection prevention, and occupational health and safety measures. Now, if you're wondering where your business fits in, what you must do, what are the mandatory health and safety measures that must be taken by your business, you can go to the website covid19response.lc or govt.lc to get the protocols for your particular sector. So that information there coming from the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmar George, clearing up what I think in the last 24 hours was a bit confusing for some people. We initially got word that you would have to apply to the relevant ministry that your business was registered with. But at this time, we're getting new word from the authorities that you can go ahead and open your business once you adhere to the health and safety protocols under COVID-19 watch. Carlton?
Merci tellement. Nous allons continuer par le développement et information ici à Headquarters COVID-19 à sous un mardi bon matin. Là, nous tenons CMO, chef officier médical Saint Lucia, Dr. Belma George, qui a une information connue, les vini pour 20 000 COVID là. Là, on ça veut dire, yo viennent 41 tests toutes négatives. 41 tests as vini lundi, yo hen 41 tests qui retourne qui yo tout négatif. Pour date, il a dit ça a mené en tout 827 tests qui a fait et puis ça a mis nous dans position qui bon tellement yon se bail là CMO a fait bien clair c'est date qui à présent yo a tourner en chaille tension commune yo a commencé à faire plus tests là vini en commune pour qui manière bagay là ça qui bien important c'est pour date ces tests là qui était allé qui retourner 41 en ces tests ça vie négatif quoi c'est un bon nouvelle tout bonnement. Là vini pour place business qui peut ouvert là nous avons une nouvelle aussi Dr. Belma George où ça ouvert business mais chen yon bagay en l'idée où ni poursuivre guide national protocole qui veut dire parmi bagay kon distance sociale c'est pour ou mouche ça dans business ou dans business là aussi les moun supposé mais masque en tout en business là ou supposé ni bagay pour sanitize là mais moun toutes ces bagay ça ni pour ou ni pour faire assurer ou service guide ça mais encore nous dit ici ou ni pour faire application avec hen faire assurer yo approuvé mais là nous attend moun ça suivre protocole les vini pour business pour ou qui pas financer qui ça ou supposé faire qui business ko business ou tomber les vini pour protocole qui ça ou supposé faire pour ouvert là j'ai une information et de ça là sur internet là sur www.covid19response.lc na vie répéter ça www.covid19response.lc là on a toute information en bas qui section business sous ka tomber qui ça et où besoin mettre en place pour ouvrir place là pour faire assurer tout le monde qui suivre protocole encore les nous dit protocole nous ka parler dit si pied hot yon a l'autre nous ka parler dit masque nous ka parler dit travailleur kani tout équipement yo besoin pour travailler en place là en parmi l'autre. Merci tellement pour vous qui a coûté et qui a suivi Gide.
Thank you so much for that, Carlton. We are due for our first break for the morning. If you're just joining us, do stay tuned. When we come back, we take a look at Sunday's panel discussion, the digital economy, especially as we're in this COVID-19 era, its benefits, how we can hone and capitalize on the digital platform to continue and to keep our economy afloat at this time. So do stay tuned for that and more coming up in just a moment.
It's easy to become afraid during a disease outbreak, especially a pandemic. How can I catch it? Who already has it? How do I stay safe? How can I keep my family safe? Uncertainty can lead us to reject or to be afraid of people affected by COVID-19. It's normal that we feel worried. But sticking with the facts on how to prevent COVID-19 from spreading and what to do if you encounter symptoms is our best defense. Rejecting or fearing people can cause them to hide their symptoms. It discourages people from practicing preventive behaviors like wearing masks and physical distancing. It can even stop people from seeking health care. Ultimately, this means the disease is harder to diagnose, treat, and contain. So how can we overcome fear and stigma to help the fight against COVID-19? Words matter. Talk to and about people affected by the virus with respect. Spread the facts. Practice and share the recommendations endorsed by your health authorities. Be kind and look after each other. Check in on your family, friends, and neighbors. Offer support where you can. Have you seen social stigma happening in your community? How did you respond? Tell us in the comments below.
Thank you so much for staying tuned. If you're just joining us, a special good morning to you. This is the Saint Lucia COVID-19 response report for today, Tuesday, the 19th of May, 2020. My name is Jessie Leonce. I'm joined in, as usual, by Carlton Cyril. We continue with this morning's reports, updates, developments, as you would call it, with news that the 73rd World Health Assembly, Saint Lucia's delegation participates in the first ever virtual World Health Assembly being held this week. We have a report from Fernell Neptune. When we come back, we'll talk about that event.
Health officials were granted the opportunity to participate in the 73rd World Health Assembly and commit to the fight against COVID-19. Minister for Health and Wellness, Senator the Honorable Mary Isaac, says she is elated that the virtual session allowed for the involvement of the health team and also the contribution towards the health agenda.
This year, to see that other members of staff at the Ministry of Health are being given this opportunity to experience what it is like at the World Health Assembly makes it very, very exciting for me. I can sit here with my staff and we are having discussions as, you know, the sessions go on, as they call the different presenters. You know, for me, that is such a big learning exercise and a learning process that it makes me feel very excited to be part of it all.
Senator the Honorable Mary Isaac says the virtual session definitely afforded them the platform to report on their progress in the fight against COVID-19 and also to acquire knowledge on ways to respond to the pandemic.
We are learning a lot about what other member states did to handle the whole COVID situation, as well as what they intend to do. So we ourselves can look at best practices that they are speaking of and see how we can put it vis-a-vis what we are doing in Saint Lucia, what we have done, what we did, and what we are going to continue to do in Saint Lucia.
Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Glensford Joseph, says he's extremely delighted to play a significant part in this process.
Having the World Health Assembly virtually this year gives us an opportunity to join with the Minister of Health, the Chief Medical Officer to be part of such an important forum where they're discussing several issues that are so critical to the world. From this World Health Assembly, we will be leaving with great ideas that we can take back to our place of work, in our daily activities, that we can implement to make this world a better place.
The 73rd World Health Assembly is attended by delegations from all WHO member states and is convened virtually from May 18th to the 19th. Reporting from the Communications Unit of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, I am Fernell Neptune.
Thank you very much for that, Fernell. That report coming from Fernell Neptune on the 73rd World Health Assembly being held this week. We heard from the Health Minister, Senator the Honorable Mary Isaac, that the virtual session is definitely affording them the platform to report their progress in the fight of COVID and also acquiring knowledge as we progress into our recovery phase for COVID-19. And speaking of recovery, all businesses are permitted to reopen this week. Right. Just to let you know that previously reported businesses would have had to apply before getting the clearance from their relevant agency, government agency, to reopen. We're just letting you know that we're getting word today, an update from the CMO, Dr. Sharon Belmar George, that all businesses are permitted to open under condition. They must adhere to the protocols as per their sector, and those protocols can be accessed via the website COVID19response.lc. So you are permitted to reopen, but you must adhere. And I think it's safe to say, Carlton, that you would have to do quite a bit of work if you've not begun as yet, because the protocols, the procedures are very stringent. We do encourage you to stay, ensure that you pour through the document as per your sector. If your sector is salons and the beauty sector, you ensure that you get all of the necessary products, the hand sanitizer, gloves, PPE, whatever the case may be, as per your sector, whatever you need to operate your business. We hope that you can get these supplies and put in the necessary measures within your business place so you can resume operations as soon as possible.
Yeah, and one of the things I think, Jess, is very important, people should note, there's a national protocol. And then, as heard from Mr. Ragnanan, he did say there is one uniform protocol, but you need to tailor it according to your specific business. In terms of, for example, you have the churches, religious, which will have to go to equity and social justice if they are not too sure as to what to follow. But then you have the gyms. You understand, that would fall under different heading. So, encore, ça qui bien important, ça nous a vie répéter avec nous voulons tout le monde comprendre ou ça ouvert business ou, mais y en a ces bagages là qui bien important, nous tenons hot CMO encore nous a vie répéter parce qu'avant ça nous dégarde on pour faire application, mais information ou ça joindre les venir pour protocole parce que c'est Ragnanan ici qui te cabaye pour chaque secteur qui ça ou besoin faire. Ça qui bien important là ni un protocole tout le monde ni pour suivre. Et encore nous a dit ça. Là vini pour distance sociale tout le monde savent ça. 6 pieds ou supposé chebe 6 pieds. Là vini pour gonder place ou supposé connaître gonder place ou quand ils savent combien monde ou ça permettre entrer en business. L'autre bagay là c'est ou ni pour faire assurer bon la porte là les monde entrer premier pas yoni masse dernier pas yoni bagay pour sanitize la main savon et pour laver la main et pas oublier travailleurs y en a ces bagay là qui bien important pas dit temps si monter ka ba explanation ça il dit là vini pour ou qui ni place business ou premier ces bagay là on ni pour déterminer c'est là vini pour travailleurs péni ka travail qui ni check malade quand ces moun s'appli vulnérable. Après ça on y pouvait accorder pour business ou comme moun qui ça travaille et wete kayo avec travail. Et qu'on pas obligé parce que ça nous quand pêcher ben ça si moi regarder ou quand pêcher moun si mais ou j'ai vermine quoi pli ou ça hen moun hod yon a l'autre pli mais y quoi encore nous ka vie ba ou website là information sous pas siwe ou ça là sur internet là et qu'on savent côté qui ça ou côté business ou ka tomber encore adresse ça sur internet là c'est www.covid covid19response.lc. Ek nou kan encourage ou souple pour aller là depuis ou pas siwe, aller là pou kay qui section ou ka tombe en bas, qui jid là vini pour protocole, a pas dit ça qui hala, a pas dit jid nou jahen, hod CMO avec information hod bureau qui responsable pour santé ou kay côté ou ka tombe. Quand encore nous ka vie répéter, ou peut ouvert mais changer protocole national qui ja établi avec ou ni pour suivre.
Thanks for that, Carlton. And just to let you all know that there are 10 protocols and or guidelines that are placed on the website. So depending on your sector, you can select. There are protocols for call centers, there are protocols for doctors' offices, there are protocols for seafood retail outlets, protocols for quarries, concrete and construction sites. There are protocols for tourism accommodation services, protocols for community and faith-based organizations, employees and customers for stores including hardware, as well as protocols for businesses and offices, safety guidelines for reopening beauty and wellness establishments. So we do encourage you as soon as is humanly possible to get on there and ensure before you open your business that you are compliant, that your business has met all of the health and safety measures that are outlined in your particular protocol, the protocol that is relevant to your sector. So we do hope that you can do that as soon as possible so we could get your business up and running in no time. Again, the measures are in some cases pretty stringent, especially when I look at the protocols for tourism and accommodation services, pretty stringent measures being taken. We heard from Ms. Donalyn Vite, the Permanent Secretary from Tourism, speaking on, what it will take, what the conditions for a visitor even coming to Saint Lucia, having a very cloistered experience. No doubt I can imagine that the hotels will ensure that this experience is also enjoyable, but there will be several measures that would need to be taken, starting off with them having a negative test from in whatever country that they are in, negative test for COVID-19 before even coming to Saint Lucia, before even being given a ticket to come to Saint Lucia. So that can hopefully be some consolation for individuals who are concerned as to how things will pan out when we fully reopen the country. We fully reopen stage 4 of the country on June 1st.
But I think what is most important to Jess is the fact that you have time now. While we speak of it, there's enough time for one to put in, or do the research and make the necessary adjustments in the individual businesses. And you are right when it comes to tourists. We will see tourism, we will see a lot of those protocols in place. But needless to say, we are operating in the global, regional, and of course, by extension, we have CARICOM, which we are putting our house in order. And of course, the intention is when everywhere else gets or follow in place, that we already have things in order.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the message that we've been getting from the authorities is that, business never sleeps. And so competitiveness will be more fierce than ever at this time in the COVID-19 era, and we need to put our best foot forward. Saint Lucia has been fortunate enough to have, in its management of COVID-19, we have not seen cases skyrocket. Capacities are very much capable at this time of taking care of the cases that we have so far seen. And so due to that, the authorities are confident that we can now proceed into new phases of our recovery period, our mitigation and recovery of COVID-19 at this time. We're in phase 3, that's increased incremental operations. And you have been seeing over the last few weeks, we're in the last stage of phase 3, increased incremental operations, reopening of businesses and services. We have seen that in the last few weeks, and on June 1st we will be moving formally, if I make reference to the National Consultation Assessment presentation, we will be moving into stage 4, where we have the introduction of the service industry, local economy fully resumed as new norms are accepted by the public. And it's a new normal. Wearing the mask is a new normal.
Yeah.
Always sanitizing is a new normal, and ensuring that you keep a distance, 6-foot distance from other individuals is the new normal, and we have to just get used to it as we go into trying to keep St. Lucia afloat economy-wise. And speaking of that, we have a report now on the digital economy. There was a panel discussion live on NTN on Sunday night. If you missed it, here are the highlights in this news report.
The advent of the COVID-19 pandemic and the constraints and challenges imposed on society and people's lives by the virus have incited an enormous effort towards innovation and development. As such, the digital economy is being used as a source of resilience and competitiveness to mitigate the effects of the virus during this time. This is especially critical to the business community as it has been hard hit by the pandemic. Director of the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, Fiona Hinkson, explained the importance of integrating technology into a business to ensure its survival.
Traditional sectors can become more resilient, more competitive through the use and adoption of digital innovations, basically. So with the digital transfusion that is happening across the globe, permeating every single sector within an economy, changing the way we live, the way we work, learn, socialize, and so on, the traditional sectors can become more resilient. So I believe they are intertwined. They do not, the digital economy do not exist in isolation of its own. It's basically used to improve processes. You have online banking, e-commerce, the online banking replacing long lines at the bank. You have e-commerce versus visiting a mall, manufacturing, automation, and so on. So the list goes on. So even post-COVID, I believe that we'll see even more acceleration, more transformation with the digital economy.
Sherilyn Monrose Gustav, Chief ICT Officer at the Division of Public Sector Modernization, encouraged individuals to take advantage of the opportunities arising from the digital transformation.
This is no longer the status quo going forward. Absolutely. You cannot depend on the traditional economy alone. You need to now invest in ways. So you, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, etc., you may not have the skill set in terms of being able to promote your goods and services online, but there are certain companies or different options that you can avail yourself to in terms of providing, of having that digital presence. So the threat is only if we don't try to change. If we stay rooted in the old ways, then of course it would be a disruptor, as you indicate, and we will stay behind. But if you really want to catch up, the world is moving ahead. I think COVID has shown us the world is moving ahead. There's no turning back at this point.
The Chief ICT Officer noted that the Division of Public Modernization is currently in the process of updating the national ICT and sectoral policy.
We've engaged the private sector, all the different sectors, in terms of contributing and providing that guidance in terms of how they see ICT benefiting them, their sector. And we're going to use this to come up with this national ICT and sectoral policy that we're going to then use in terms of guiding the government in terms of the different programs, etc., that can be developed for especially the persons like entrepreneurs, persons who really don't have, they don't know how to move forward into this digital economy.
According to the Digital Economy Report for 2019, the digital economy accounts for approximately 39 million jobs globally, and the digital deliverable exports amount to 50% of the global services exports. From the Government Information Service, I am Anicia Antoine reporting.
Thank you very much, Anicia Antoine, for that. Just a quick roundup on what panned out at the on Sunday night for the panel discussion. Roadmap to recovery from COVID-19, the digital economy. I want to thank all of the panelists for sitting on Sunday night on NTN Live and giving some information, much needed information and perspective on how we can go into this digital economy. At this point, we just want to give you some quick updates before we go to a break, just to remind you that the zoning has ceased. There are no more zoning checkpoints as confirmed by the Commissioner of Police, Acting Commissioner of Police Milton Daisy, effective May 18th. That was yesterday. So now individuals can now move about freely, but we also got word from Milton Daisy that There will be checkpoints around and about the island to ensure that individuals are going about the right business at this time, because we continue to be under a state of emergency, and we do encourage you that if you don't have to go out, if you don't have to work, if you are not currently going to school, which you shouldn't be, you should be home, you do stay home as much as possible, as often as possible. If you're just going out for essentials, stay at home. Stay at home. And if you're going out, do use the mask and the physical distancing. Observe all of the measures that have been outlined by the authorities. There are restrictions on social activities, prohibition on crowd events. This continues to be maintained. The airports are still closed to incoming flights, and ports are closed to seafaring and private boating. And that will continue until the first week in June. And the first week in June, we go formally into phase 4, where we will see the resumption of tourism accommodation services. We will see with that the reopening of our ports. So that information there coming from the authorities. In terms of our water situation, you are aware that we are in the middle of a drought. The government of Saint Lucia has announced a water-related emergency. It has been declared, and so we do hope that you can conserve water, the water that is coming from your taps. We are not allowed to wash our vehicles with a hose, no watering of lawns, hedges, gardens, no pressure washing of a house, no concrete mixing or block making at this time, no filling, leaking or overflowing storage tanks, no tampering of the water and sewage company's infrastructure to divert or abstract water from its network, no activity which would generally require the use of considerable amount of water, excessive quantity of water at this time. And there are penalties that are associated with this. It's all outlined in the statutory instrument number 75 of the government of Saint Lucia. And speaking of WASCO, that company wishes to inform the public that all services which were suspended during the COVID-19 period, the restrictions which were placed on Saint Lucia, their businesses will resume from Monday, 18th May 2020. And that includes reconnections, new connections, disconnections. So we do hope that you can put all your business in order. If it means that you have to make a call to WASCO to avoid disconnection at this time, we do encourage you to do so to avoid any inconvenience. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we sit down with officials from the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO. Do stay tuned.
With all that's happening around us, simple adjustments are necessary to keep us all safe. When calling 911, we may need a little more information to deploy the right personnel and protocols. You may be asked about your travel history, signs and symptoms, contact and movement history, and whether others in your household are exhibiting similar symptoms. Please be patient and cooperative during this time to ensure you receive the best possible care while keeping our first responders safe.
Better yet, use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for Saint Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging are a no.
Advice, give you the please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for Saint Lucia. Together let us win this war. Saint Lucia, be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further
further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
We got this. Yeah. I feel make it. Ooh. We don't have no other choice but to be strong.
We gonna make it.
What do you mean?
God.
I am a voice of hope, and I just wanna let you know that I believe in our strength as a people and the promise of a bright tomorrow.
And I want you to believe and trust.
I know God is watching over us, and I believe if we all come together now, everything will be alright.
I'm sure we can lift the fever. It's a fight and we must all be shared. I can't believe this day has come.
For our sake, we must keep distance. Everyone looking out for their neighbor. Islands in the Caribbean sun.
It's time to be strong, the battle is on.
For the future of each generation. Every daughter and son united as one.
Sing on, Caribbean. Don't worry about the circumstances. Don't stress about the fears and the madness. Together we will take our chance at life and confidence. Don't worry about the circumstances.
Must come.
Don't stress about the fears and the madness. Together we will take our chance.
No stress.
We got this. We got this. We got this. We got this.
Hear me? Rough it tough, the dirty enough, still have to get up. Confirming that the giddy and we have to stand up. As virus a rush, we still can't touch, we still can't crush we. We have faith, hope, strength, protection, and the Almighty.
And we prayed up, yes, yes, we prayed up. And we stayed up, yes, yes, we stayed up. Head high full of confidence, we not keep bucket, tell them we never gave up. Big up essential workers, rest in peace. We fallen soldiers, Corona can't conquer. We West Indies, one love and unity.
Don't worry about the circumstances. Don't stress about the fears and the madness. Together we will take our chance at life. We got this. We got this. We got
We got this.
Thank you so much for staying tuned. This is the COVID-19 response report in St. Lucia for today, Tuesday, the 19th of May, 2020. And we've been delivering you quite a few updates. Of course, things have changed this week. We have entered another tier of our response to COVID-19 in St. Lucia. At this time, we have all businesses opening as of this week, provided that you do comply with the protocols that have been put in place for each of the sectors. There is an overarching protocol, but if you do go to the website, covid19response.lc, you will see all of the sectors' specific protocols that must be adhered to. So if you run a salon, if you run a business, if you run an office front, you can go on there and see what it says for your specific business, and we do hope that you can comply. There will be strict enforcement of the protocols, businesses being monitored by the Environmental Health Department. So we do hope that before you do open, you prepare and you ensure that you have all of the measures in place in terms of procedures, in terms of apparatus, ensuring that you have masks for your staff, that you ensure that you outline the 6-foot distance that must be placed outside your business, ensuring that your square footage is enough to accommodate all your staff. All of these are measures that are outlined in the protocols that you must adhere to before reopening your business. But we're getting word from the CMO that all businesses are permitted to reopen as of this week. So this week we have businesses opening. We go into the 4th phase in full on June 1st, the first week of June, and during that time we will see the full resumption of services and business, the economy in St. Lucia, with the ports being reopened, and we also see tourism accommodation services being resumed, hotels being allowed to reopen, not to mention the very stringent measures that are being taken to ensure that St. Lucia does not have another COVID-19 situation, an increase in COVID-19 cases due to any importation of such. So we do hope that you continue to comply. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure that they take care of themselves and their families as we reopen the country. St. Lucia has been fortunate enough The world is not going to wait on every country to reopen. Of course, it is highly competitive. Business, it will be fierce. If I could quote the Invest St. Lucia representative at the week before last panel discussion, business will be ferocious. Competition will be ferocious globally. And St. Lucia, fortunate enough, has been able to manage its COVID-19 situation so much that we are now able to reopen our society. And we need to thank, the gods for that. At this time, we are able to reopen, and we do hope everybody plays their part to ensure that we do not have to revert to previous phases. There are contingency plans in place, but we will have to revert if we do see a resurgence in COVID-19 cases on island. At this point, we will be speaking to NEMO representatives on the drought situation. Of course, getting an update on where things are in terms of our response to COVID-19 from the NEMO perspective, National Emergency Management Organization perspective, but we will also be speaking specifically to the water-related emergency, the drought legislation that has been put in place to help us conserve water at this time. You would have seen that our grass is not as green. It's very hot, right, Carlton? And at this time, we're seeing that being reflected from WASCO. They're telling us that water levels are low at this time. We are experiencing drought conditions to the point that the water-related emergency has been declared in Saint Lucia, and there have been a list of prohibitions at this time in terms of not wasting water, not wasting, excessive amounts of water that come through your taps. So I would like to say a special good morning to our guests at this time. If you could just introduce yourselves to the general public, our viewers this morning.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, listeners. My name is Jason Ernest. I'm the Director of the Water Resources Management Agency.
Okay.
And good morning to everyone. My name is Andrew George from the Program Development Officer at the National Emergency Management Office.
Okay. We'll start with you, Mr. Ernest. If you could just give us an understanding of what is the situation right now in terms of the drought conditions and the response, St. Lucia's response to this drought situation.
Okay, well, right now, simply put, it's a case of demand versus supply. The demand is great, and the supply is unfortunately dwindling. We haven't had a rainfall or significant rainfall in a while. It's slow rainfall, and the predictions had shown that we would be going through a dry patch for the first half of this year, and the conditions hasn't changed. In January and February, we did receive moderate rainfall, which helped to recharge our rivers and also the storage at the John Compton Dam and the catchment areas where WASCO abstract water, the intakes. But from March and April, rainfall has been significantly low. In comparison to previous years, in 2015, we had a water stress year. The rainfall for March at the John Compton Dam was approximately 50% below what we got for 2015, and it was a water stress year. In April, it went down significantly. There was a 70% decrease in rainfall compared to April of that year. And compared to last year, it was even less. So definitely there hasn't been a recharge of rainfall into the system. So it reached a point where decisions had to be made. It took a while for us to do the analysis and to make sure that at the end of the day, when we reach at this point, which was the last resort, in terms of declaring the water-related emergency, we had no choice, and we had to look at in terms of the population and the amount of water that we had available, that we could make it stretch going into July, when the Med Services said that this is the month that we normally receive a significant rainfall into our system.
Okay. And can you tell us about some of the measures that have been taken in terms of prohibition and otherwise?
Okay, so just to go back in April, we realized that, well, we had our first meetings, this was more or less brought to the fore by WASCO when they noticed that in terms of the storage capacity was dwindling. And from that, we had a conversation between the water resources, the Met services, and WASCO. So coming from the Met services, a drought alert was issued based on all the available data, and through that, WASCO then issued a press release in terms of coming out of the drought alert that persons should now start going into conservation mode. Even during that time, because weather is random, we were expecting some form of rainfall during that period, but that never materialized. So measures were taken, implemented by WASCO in terms of going into the rationing and what have you from that time. But still, in terms of the outflow from the system was significantly much greater than the inflow into the system. And still, going into April, we had another analysis of the data, and it still showed that we will still be receiving less than normal rainfall, even at the start of the wet season. So when some case studies were done, and in terms of the current volumes that we have and the demand and what was being abstracted, how long would it last moving into the next few weeks, then the decision was made that we had to issue a water-related emergency. So in a nutshell, it means that persons should be going into conservation mode. It's not only WASCO managing the water system or the supplies that they have, but persons actually monitoring and managing the supplies that they receive, because things are, well, it's not business as usual. So the prohibitions speak mainly to persons using potable water for non-potable uses. So in what it says is that, where you used to water your lawns, or use your hose to wash your vehicle, even for significant agricultural activity, that person should cease and desist from doing that until there is, well, the level of rainfall has increased. WASCO is now moving back into a normal mode of operations. So it's a matter of conservation. So right now it's more or less water for the population. So a lot of activities, or a lot of complementary activities that depend on water from WASCO, that person should cut down on those activities. We know, well, it always leads back to the economics, but the bottom line is the situation is what it is, and we can't do any different. Unfortunately, in Saint Lucia, our storage capacity is small, and you know that with the situation at the John Compton Dam, it's even less, but demand always increase. The demand is always increasing, and unfortunately, the storage capacity is not catching up. And now we speak of climate change. Right now, in the dry season, we have less rainfall, because even if we say the dry season, but we still had significant rainfall to more or less to keep us afloat until we move into the wet season. But for now, it's getting drier, it's getting hotter, and in terms of the intensity of the rainfall that we have, it's even less. So once we continue to take out more than what is coming in, even if we have some rainfall showers, it still doesn't put us back to a point where we can consider it to be normal.
Okay. When we come back, we talk more on the drought legislation. We are in drought conditions, and a water-related emergency has been declared here in Saint Lucia. We're going to talk about how it affects our COVID-19 response, us having to wash our hands a bit more during this time. Do stay tuned for all this information and more coming up after the break.
Because of how quickly the coronavirus spreads, each new case calls for increased public vigilance. Know what is happening, understand why, and comply. Think of the protocols as war tactics. Personal protection tactics. Keep 6 feet away from others. Avoid riding the bus, gathering on beaches, in bars, and shops. Public protection tactics. Quarantine yourself if you feel fluish in case you have been exposed. Call 311 or a respiratory clinic for advice. Country tactics, partial lockdown. Supermarkets, small grocers, pharmacies and ATMs are accessible before curfew. Total lockdown. Everywhere stays closed 24/7 for a stipulated period. Team tactics. Don't only follow the protocols, be a protocols police. Let's win this.
Together let us win this war. Saint Lucia be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
Welcome back to this morning's COVID-19 response report. We are live on NTN from the GIS studios, and I'm speaking to Mr. Jason Ernest, the director at the Water Resources Management Agency, as well as Mr. Andrew George from NEMO. He is a usual here on our program, Program Development Officer from the National Emergency Management Organization. Special good morning again to you both. We were just speaking about, what plunged us into this drought, this water-related emergency, the drought conditions we are facing here in Saint Lucia. And you mentioned us not using potable water that is coming from Wasco for non-potable purposes. Can you just get into, you mentioned agriculture. If you could speak to the significance of us not using that water right now. I know you did a little bit for the purpose of persons just coming in, just joining the live. You could speak to the significance of us conserving water as much as possible right now.
Yes, well, water conservation is something that we have been pushing at the agency for some time now, because we're noticed over the past few years there has been a reduction in the availability of water in the system at certain points in time. So what happens is that the spatial distribution has changed. So what you might find is that if you look at the data, historical data, you might see, well, the monthly totals are roughly the same, but in terms of the rainfall events have certainly changed. So, with climate change, we talk about too much water or too little water. So even if you have a lot of water, it doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of the day you would have that water captured. The analogy like I like to use is that you have a drum by your house, the water comes from your guttering, you have significant rainfall. After 5 minutes, your drum fills, but it continues to rain. But the drum just overflows and all that water just goes into the gutter and goes back to the sea. And what you're left with is just what is in the drum. So basically on an island level, this is what more or less is happening in the system. So we do push for persons to conserve water. Now, in the case of when it comes to drought conditions, first and foremost, you look at the population as to make sure that there is enough water for the population, because what happens is that all other activities are carried out when persons have water to more or less take care of the basic needs. So first you start with your basic needs, and then you could move out into other activities. So we need to ensure that there is enough water in the system for Wasco to use. Now, we talk about agriculture, but the farmers do abstract, and we're looking at, if we look at in the statutory instrument that was issued for the water-related emergency, it talks about abstracting water upstream of Wasco intakes, but doesn't necessarily mean like downstream of the intake that water abstraction is prohibited. There is still space for persons to use that water for irrigation, right? So this is something that probably have to look into moving forward, that the amount of water that is available. We talk about using drought-resistant crops and what have you. So these are things that we have to look into, so that in terms of using that water efficiently and still boosting our food production in that sense.
You mentioned drum earlier, and I immediately what immediately came to mind were alternatives. So this legislation, the water-related emergency, speaking to potable water. Can you speak to alternatives, perhaps that farmers can use at this time?
Well, like I just mentioned, the alternative is using water from our tributaries, the streams and the rivers, but those would have to be downstream. From the WASCO intakes. Now, most of our farming activity is actually downstream of the WASCO intakes. We also look at rainwater harvesting as an alternative, and it's not only for farming but also for on a residential level as well, because like I mentioned, even in the dry season that rain falls and a household can capture significant water. Even on a catchment level, it may not make a significant difference, but on a household level, persons can capture enough water that they can use it to carry out some of the daily needs for that household. So this is what it is. There is still potential to increase the storage capacity in Saint Lucia, but mainly from a household level, so persons doing the investment in, in tanks and what have you.
Okay, and we heard of the water-related emergency and the drought legislation coming into play, and when taking a look, we're hearing the construction sector is open, but we're seeing that there are prohibitions for concrete mixing and block making, so the same can apply in terms of all these alternatives to the construction sector, economy.
Yes, and the same applies because downstream of the intakes, in a number of catchments, they're not really into a hydrological drought per se. So we're in a meteorological, agricultural, but in a hydrological drought is some of the catchment. It's not all the catchment because the profile and the characteristics for the different catchments around the island are different. So there is still water available downstream that ordinarily would go to the sea, but there is still enough water in some of them that abstraction can happen and they would still have enough left for environmental flows.
Okay. Mr. George, Program Development Officer at NEMO, when it rains, it certainly does pour. We have COVID-19, the drought, and the impending hurricane season. Can you just speak to the drought at this time? What measures have been put in place in NEMO's approach at this time?
Yeah, thank you. And as you rightly said, almost in the perfect storm. We have the COVID-19 to deal with, which requires, as you said, hand washing, using a lot of water for sanitizing. Now we have drought, which is now speaking to conservation of that same water. And then we have the hurricane season, which now has unofficially started because we have Tropical Storm Afra has already formed. So we do have, this is the 6th straight year that a storm has formed before what is considered the official start of the season. So as we talk about the new normal will probably mean that there is no set season, and maybe the hurricane season needs to be extended up into the middle of May because sometimes we do get those storms forming. So all of that we have to deal with. At the national level, we have what we call the National Flood and Drought Committee, which Mr. Ernest spoke to originally. Those are the ones who have the meetings to look at both flood and drought and how to plan for those events. We do have a drought plan, the National Drought Plan, which speaks to what should happen at what stage. And so that is why a water emergency can be declared once there is a trigger has been reached. So we can then say, okay, well, we need to now trigger this water emergency. Then to give the water resource agencies and the Met Office and NEMO some more authority to deal with the conservation. And that is when at the national level, our job now is to speak to the country and to get the buy-in from persons for them to understand why we need to do what we need to do. So talking about conservation, not wasting water, and the repercussions for such. And this is why the legislation is there, because sometimes you have to have that level of persons that have to understand we're not putting the water emergency to penalize people and say, look, you mustn't do this. But there is a method to this, and there's a reason why it's been done. Because industry has to go on, as Mr. Ernest mentioned. Basic needs have to be met because of water. We have to make sure that as many persons as possible in the society receives water. We have to have a whole of society approach to everything so that persons who are vulnerable should receive water. It shouldn't be one sector alone gets water and one person alone gets water. So we have to ensure that the water is conserved throughout the society to enable everybody to enjoy that resource, because water is life, and it literally is. And so we can't have, and I think we also, if there is a silver lining to this thing, is that the persons who use the most water, the industries and the institutions that use the most water, which are the hotels and the schools, are closed for now.
What I was coming to say, we're reopening the country on the first week of June.
Exactly. So now those large users of water will then reopen, and we have the hotels with the pools and the number of rooms and so all of that. So that will then add to the stress of the number of persons using the water. If you have the schools reopening, then that again puts more stress on the scarce resource. So the system has to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that we divide what we have equally among everybody? And so we're saying, okay, we will have to now start conserving water. Also, Mr. Ernest talked about it, we need to encourage people to do more water storage. Through the Saint Lucia Development Bank, there is a climate financing facility, it's called CAF, which is the Climate Adaptation Financing Facility, which gives small loans and for persons to purchase tanks and water storage, anything to be able to store water. Also, water harvesting instruments so that you can then harvest rainwater for yourself. So persons can get that access to that. So for us at the national level, this is all the little pieces that we're trying to put together to ensure that at the end of the day, water is not only conserved, but people have enough water to meet their basic needs so that industry can continue, the economy can continue, and then persons have enough water to keep themselves sanitized and sanitary, because with COVID you need to ensure you do a lot of hand washing, which is using a lot of water. And so we're talking about using the water, but using it properly and using it wisely.
Okay, Mr. Ernest, how will your office contend with the resumption of businesses? Of course, we would have been enjoying, as Mr. George stated, less operations in the country, therefore more water to go around. But at this time, how will we be contending with the reopening of hotels in the first week of June?
Well, since the water-related emergency has been declared, now it's for the other partner agencies involved, to see exactly how that would impact on their sector, and then have that conversation as to exactly how we move forward. Because what happens is you find that most of the sectors that rely heavily on water, they also speak to WASCO. So WASCO is more or less the custodian of that stored water, so they would know how much water they have in the system and what it is that they can and cannot do. But then, like Mr. George mentioned earlier, it's a perfect storm, so definitely we would have to come together to see exactly how we move forward in that. Just saying that, I just want to mention that since at the beginning of April, we've been monitoring the situation, the situation at the time, and looking at the forecast and the outlook, and all the models saying the same thing. Even in that, we were hoping that we would have had some rainfall, at least some moderate to significant rainfall. That hasn't materialized as we would have wanted. Now that we're moving into the hurricane season, actually, I think from today there's supposed to be some tropical wave that is supposed to be passing. So when we talk about persons actually storing water on a household level, this would probably be a good opportunity for them to prepare for that. Because even if on a catchment watershed level, it doesn't make a significant difference, but hopefully persons would be able to capture some water that would be able to assist them, even if it's for a day or two. So we would encourage persons to actually do that. So we're very hopeful. So even if we're looking at the outlook and it says that low rainfall, we're still hopeful, because the weather is random. So we can't say definitely what the model is predicting would happen. but we're very hopeful that things would change in the near future. And looking at our historical data, we see that normally in July, that's when the change in trend starts to happen, when there's an upward movement in terms of the storage capacity. So if you're looking at the John Compton Dam, so April, May, there's the water level is going down, but sometime in July, it normally goes back up. So with the current volumes that we have, we're trying to make it stretch as far as possible into the coming weeks and the months, so that at least there is enough water for persons to actually carry out the daily normal functions with the available water supply.
Okay. We are speaking to Mr. Jason Ernest. He is the Director of the Water Resources Management Agency, as well as the Program Development Officer at NEMO, Mr. Andrew George. I hand over to Carlton to engage the gentleman this morning.
Encore, bonjour, merci en chay pour vous qu'avez nous à soir mardi bon matin. Aujourd'hui c'est le 19 mai. Au pays kakachile ça qui a fait de qu'on la coutume nous toujours capable au développement et information. Bon matin pas pièce différence. Nous ka parler du glo nous dans état de secours et en chay moun ka mandé pour qui ça. Ici et puis nous monsieur Andrew George NEMO et puis monsieur Jason Ernest. Là, monsieur Ernest qui est directeur et responsable pour Resource Glow Management et puis agence qui attaché puis ça. Et puis là, venu pour monsieur Andrew George, c'est lui qui est responsable pour affaires programme développement programme là côté NEMO. Et vous voyez ça, yo ici, y'en a ces bagages là, nous ni pour faire ça, c'est ministre là il établit et ben il dit nous dans état de secours c'est à sous conseil qui était bail par office monsieur Jason Ernest et qu'on nous bien tant Hodley qui a parlé yon a ces bagages là il dit c'est ou même qui savent qu'on public gloire nous ni en dame nan gloire nous ni pas assez pour bail tout le monde. Nous ni plus monde qui a servi glo pays nous ni glo quand tué nous nan kawem qui trouvé ko wed tout bam sous te ka bien écouté en parmi bagay monsieur Ernest Jadi lay vini pour moi masse en temps qui passé nous pas même ni 50% capacité a il dit veut avouer nous pas même ni 70% glo qui était là quoi ou comprendre côté nous hier à part de ça m'a besoin d'où COVID vini et yon a se ba stipulation kaitan c'est laver la main laver moun bouiser servi glo quoi nous ka parler ici et puis en chaque information ja sorti parmi yo c'est date qui moun a présent attention c'est ou pas supposé servi glo depuis après annoncement était fait date que nous ba état de secours ou pas supposé servir glo pour faire chay bagay et ça bien clair parce que nous pas ni assez glo ou pas si vous servez rose pour laver machine ou zefla ou jardin ou pas supposé servir glo les vini pour pressure wash kai et ben fait un rien courant raison pour ça encore nous pas ni assez glo pour tout le monde qui a servi ou kay tant chay monde qui dit 2 semaines 3 semaines yo pas hen glo raison pour ça encore ou asko qui responsable pour ka disséminer gloire à do yo ni pour faire ça si nous ni pour faire gloire nous ni gloire nous ni si nous ni pour servir de manière pour tout le monde un petit tap et pour manager c'est ça qui ni pour fait quand les vini pour situation monsieur George dis-moi l'emmène NEMO plein parce que nous kay bien comprendre Covid vini et puis mi à présent nous dans état de secours les vini pour glo et à présent moi bien tant ni monsieur Ernest parler dit saison cyclone saison hurricane qui vini quand il dit moi quoi les vini pour NEMO dis-moi responsabilité en dit nous de mon parole qui manière nous vivre en situation nous hier et puis qui manière NEMO en toute sa carrière
well tout ça là nous mis tout ça qui a fait là parce que nous ni pour faire Saint Lucia power pour toute bagaille so nous pour faire moun savent ni pour conserve glow ni pour store water ni pour mettre glow là les cyclones qui venir nous savent ça pour faire on nous savent on nous mettre by en note so nous allons try this moun Saint Lucia préparer c'est préparer pour tout bagay because tout bagay ça vini et tout bagay kay vini. So COVID vini, nous pour préparer pour ça. COVID kay wait pour nous pour longtemps. So nous pour make sure la si il vient encore nous préparer. Nous savons saison cyclone qui vini, so nous savons nous préparer. Bon nous ni quand même qui vini tout le monde savent tous les années quand même qui vini on est pour préparer pour ça. So pas quitter bail la pont et pour pas ça pour faire. Nous là pour bailler une information, si vous voulez une information, vous avez créé office là, si vous voulez parler bail nous ça créer nous ça créer moi nous quand bailler information pour préparer because ni pour préparer pour toute bagaille.
Enfin, ça on va dire, là il vient pour NEMO, raison qui ici c'est pas directement pour faire puis Covid, mais c'est là il vient pour rien pour faire nation pour préparation. Pièce état de secours nous gagne ou ici pour bailler mon information, éduquer mon là il vient pour situation. Pour ka dire ça pas supposé rien drôle nous parce que nous toujours à préparer pour quand même ben supposé moi ni pour dire nous supposé qu'à préparer pour lui, nous supposé préparer pour saison cyclone là, mais à présent quand nous état de secours mon pour sa manière yon pour comporter quoi yo avec moi quoi yon c'est là qui bien important c'est les il vini pour nous ça conserver l'eau power l'eau nous ka dit panique dit les l'appliquer tomber mais ni en bagay ni yon des drum ni des bail changer pour couveille et quand même voir nous ka dit même c'est yon des jours ou ni glo pour faire l'autre bail à pas dit bois ou ça user flow et puis glo ça mais pour actuellement mon pas supposé servir glo citerne expressément ça ka sorte citerne pour user parce que nous besoin glo ça nous comprenons ça bien et quand content monsieur George ka dit ou ça couiller NEMO et gen plus information ben ou ça couiller ou ça ben nous limo ça
452 3802 or you seulement 485 1145 485 1145
1145. Eh bien, mi limoa monsieur souvle pièce plus information puis couiller monsieur George directement limoa 485 yon 45 485 1145 et vous pouvez couiller NEMO limoa la office la 5D 380D. Monsieur honnêtement gâté fort créole là fort mais n'a quitté monsieur George moi quoi a parlé ACS ou voulez entendre dire rien by nation créole just pour faire moun savent ça là just by petit parole courte.
Pour nous actuellement c'est pas décision nous devons faire mais nous pas tenir choix pour faire. C'est situation qui est bien sérieuse et que nous avons fait tout nous ça fait pour essayer ouais nous néglo juste puis l'appli et service mettre la cadi l'année ça la caini plus cyclone et peut-être yo caini 3 qui dangereux qui plus dangereux so c'est by moi ka dire ko pour mon chaîne glo a kayo puis même si l'année chay l'appli de c'était la paneglo et que pas l'appli pas tomber la paneglo mais si on est ma glo a kayo il a n'importe bail où le faire on est glo là so c'est un bail ajustement qu'a poussé pour mon ouais ça.
Okay. Oui. Et puis là il y a encore messieurs dames vous pas qu'à peut-être encore pour vous qui peut-être pas savent venir lundi le 18 mai pays a trouvé que ministre a annoncé nous dans état de secours raison pour ça encore tant monsieur Ernest Kadi là il venu pour situation nous c'est nous pas ni assez gros pour moun qui ka servi business moun plus moun ka servi passer nous ni quoi demande là pour gloire pas assez pour moun qui vle et encore nous ka met en cuidado là yon c'est bail là qui bien important pour moun comprendre ça c'est un bagage qui a fait tous les l'année là où ils savent information ka vini jid ka vini avertissement ka vini pour dou avant saison cyclone nan, avant nous te juste ni Covid, yo ka dou préparer corps, faire en manière pour manager glo kayou. Après ça on pas quand même moun ni bombe. Yo ka di ou supposé ni combien bombe kayou, ou supposé ni glo là, commissaire NSV dit encore, c'est pas même si la pluie a tombé, en chay la pluie a tombé, nous pas ni glo en citerne nous quand même. Saison cyclone nan vini, nous pas ni glo quoi. Trouver yon manière pour ou ni gloire là pour les nous dans situation quoi à présent parce que nous savons dommage hurricane ga fait monsieur NS bien fait nous changer là vini pour office météorologie yo dit nous qu'on nous ka expecter à plus près 3 cyclones qui très dangereux qui peut passer ça Dieu si pas passer mais qui ça ka fait quoi avertissement c'est pour mettre un bagage en place pour ou peni glossa là et qu'on état de secours fait assurer messieurs dames ou servi glon dans manière kay manager pas quitter citerne non ouvert nous attendre ces petits bagages ça est bien important pas quitter citerne non ouvert pas dit on ka brocher dents pas dit on ka laver assiette pas faire ces bagages ça sous savon dans côté toilette ou bathroom dans glo qui a coulé manger parce que on ka ici pour ça quand t'es glo ou ka gaspiller quand c'est ça qu'a fait ici et puis nous va continuer la discussion ici comme nous encore Jean-Hod NEMO nous monsieur Jason Ernest et puis monsieur Andrew George qui a bonne information expressement là pour faire et puis état de secours nous dans cette lycée.
Yes. So that we are in conservation mode, water conservation mode, and just speaking to, you know, the use of potable water is this water and sewage, water-related emergency declaration. We are in a water-related emergency. We've seen the drought conditions all around us. It is clear, and we do hope that you take all of the measures necessary to ensure that you conserve water. You do your part to conserve water at this time. And there were some concerns upon looking at the legislation, prohibitions on concrete mixing and block making, but we're getting, you know, the word from Mr. Ernest that we can do rainwater harvesting in the for economic purposes, as well as if I'm looking for agricultural purposes, abstraction. It speaks to prohibition of abstraction of raw water upstream of the water and sewage infrastructure. But we're getting from Mr. Ernest that the farmers can get water from downstream, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but we'd like to just let you know that we do appreciate you tuning in and watching and listening for this very important update. We are in a drought and we do have a water-related emergency having been declared. Up to this time, all businesses are permitted to operate as we enter the new normal, that is Phase 3 going into Phase 4, but you must adhere to the very stringent protocols to guard against COVID-19 as we reopen our economy. And do make sure that you try your best to conserve water at this time. We've been hit with several challenges, COVID-19 being one, and now this drought situation being another. I now invite Mr. Ernest and Mr. George to just give their final comments before we close.
Yes. What I would like to, or persons out there to understand is that water has a value. There is a value to water. You know, the proverbial saying, you never miss the water till the well runs dry. And what we see is that in 1 year, water could be both treasure and trash, depending on the availability of that resource. But what we realize now with the changing climate, now things are becoming a little bit more dire, especially during the dry season, and persons should be taking the necessary measures to put themselves in that mood that even when we have a significantly low rainfall or we have an extremely long dry period, that it does not really affect them significantly. But it's not something that should be done seasonally, it should be done throughout the year. So, you know, putting yourself into that conservation and using the water efficiently. So I just want persons to just take note of what is happening now. So even if when we come out of that situation, God willing, that persons would still remember what exactly was involved and would have taken the remedial action so that it does not repeat itself, especially on a household level.
Mr. George?
Yes. Well, what we want to say, of course, is personal responsibility. People need to understand this is the greater good. We are trying to do our best to ensure that water is used because water drives the economy, water drives everything. It drives industry, it drives business, it drives the household. So the water has to be shared with whatever we have. And as was mentioned earlier, we are in the COVID fight. We are doing good. I mean, I must say we are doing a good job of dealing with it. We are now plunged into the drought. We also now have the hurricane season coming up. We are just telling persons that they need to prepare. They also need to just ensure that they take personal responsibility for all of this, that they understand that they have certain things that they must do to assist in this fight. That we can't win this war on disasters unless everybody plays their part. We have the frontline workers that are doing their best, but everybody else have to pitch in to ensure that this battle is won. There are certain resources available to persons. As I said, the Saint Lucia Development Bank has small loans for the households to be able to do rainwater harvesting and water storage. There is also insurance, micro-insurance for businesses to be able to help transfer some of that risk, even because we have hurricanes coming up and some of the agricultural sector will be hit. We saw what happened in 2010 after Thomas. Well, before Thomas we had a drought, and when Thomas hit, we had all this land slippage and landslides because of that. So we need to understand, we need to learn from history. We need to learn that this is the new normal. Things are going to happen and things are going to get worse. And we need to understand that we have to emerge from this, particularly COVID-19, with an understanding that we all, as human beings, share with a shared humanity that we all impact each other, and we all make things worse for each other by our actions. And if we all want to live a better life, we all have to take responsibility. And all the responsibility about getting ready, getting information, using the information to get ourselves ready. And the information is available. As I said, you can call the office, get information, go online. There's lots of information out there. Persons just need to use social media, use the information, and get themselves better prepared. And we will all be better off for it.
Wonderful. And just to let you know, anybody who contravenes the water-related emergency, the measures outlined, the prohibitions outlined, they commit an offense and they are liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $3,000 or to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or to both, and to a further fine not exceeding $50 for each day during which the contravention continues. That is all the time we have for now. We would like to thank Mr. Ernest and Mr. George for their time speaking to us about the drought legislation. We do hope you continue to enjoy the rest of your day and you stay tuned to NTN for more of our important programming as we resume operations in this country. It's a new normal, and we do hope everyone can go with the flow, so to speak, in terms of wearing of the masks, ensuring the physical distancing, Carlton, ensuring that we comply, businesses, persons, individuals at this time, to what will be a new era coming out of COVID-19. My name is Jessie Leonce on behalf of Carlton and the rest of the production team. I'm signing off for now. Goodbye. Thank you very much for your time.